5 years ago, Susu abandoned Hoschen and went abroad to study without saying a word. 5 years later, Hosson abandoned medicine and became a rising star in the business world, with assets worth billions. The Lee family went bankrupt, and he used an agreement to turn her into Mrs. Hua, swearing that she would regret her betrayal. After marriage, Hosson. Aren't you worshipping money? You must spend all the pocket money you've given you every day, and you're not allowed to go home until you've spent it all. She squatted at the doorstep in the middle of the night, carrying big and small bags, with tearful eyes and afraid to go in. Black cards have unlimited amounts and cannot be spent out. Hosson. Who allowed you to lose weight? From now on, every inch of your flesh belongs to me, you can only be fat, not thin. Beautiful Lisu, with all kinds of tonics, has a visibly swollen figure. Oh no, round up. Not only did she have to rack her brains every day on how to spend money, but her beautiful figure gradually took shape and finally couldn't help but explode. Hoschen, do you have the ability to retaliate against me in a different way? The man smirked and said, then give me a child and forgive me if I have 10. Susu. After learning the truth, Huyi pursued his wife at the crematorium. Wife, money for you, people for you, please reconcile. Cubs. Mommy, give daddy another chance. Keywords of the novel. First marriage and love. Hidden marriage tycoon, he is in a hurry without a pop-up window, first marriage and love. Hidden marriage tycoon, he is in a hurry. Download the complete text. First marriage and love. Hidden marriage tycoon, he is in a hurry. Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. He really came. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. He really came. Miss Lee, after signing, you will be Mrs. Hua. Susu picked up the pen on the table and signed without hesitation. She had no choice at all. Hoschen made up his mind to marry her, but she couldn't even run away. The lawyer glanced at her signature and nodded, I will handle the marriage procedures for you and Mr. Hua properly. Susu. Don't you need us to go for a formality? Hoschen was also perfunctory enough to send a lawyer directly, and he himself was too lazy to come. Lawyer. No need, after the two successfully get married, 10 million yuan will be immediately transferred to Miss Lee's account. After seeing the lawyer, Susu immediately went to the hospital. As soon as I entered the ward, I saw Lee getting angry and throwing things. Thinking of the newly added 10 million in her account, Susu looked at her aggrieved and tearful mother and said, Mom, transfer to a separate ward. Seeing her coming, Li Mu seemed to have a backbone. Susu, where did we get the money to stay in an independent ward? Looking at Li's father, who had become increasingly angry due to illness, Susu sneered, if he continues to make trouble, he won't be able to stay in the hospital. There is more than one patient in a regular ward, and they have complained several times. After quickly transferring Li's father to an independent ward, Susu also paid the previously owed fees together. As soon as I returned to the door of the ward, I heard the conversation inside. Susu is not easy enough. If it weren't for your initial opposition to her and Hoschen, how could he have watched the collapse of the Li family? Li's father angrily shouted, stop talking. He was just a poor kid back then. How could he be worthy of us, Susu? But now, he is already the president of a superior company. Upon hearing the sound of something falling inside, Susu pursed her lips and pushed the door in, saying, Mom and Dad, I'm back. Li's father had just finished losing his temper, and when he saw her, he questioned, where did you get the money? Don't worry, wait for the surgery to be scheduled with peace of mind. Father and daughter have the same temper and are stubborn. Li Fu suddenly lowered his face and said, if you go back and beg Hoschen, I would rather die than have his alms. Susu smiled coldly and said, Dad, where did I have the face to beg someone? Besides, he is someone who would soften my heart if I asked him. Upon hearing this, Father Li's anger subsided and he began to cough. Li's mother patted his back with heartache. At this moment, Susu's phone rang, and when she saw the caller ID, her scalp immediately tingled. Gripping her phone tightly, she said, "I'll go out and answer a phone call." Walking to the door, Susu nervously looked at the familiar number, and it took her a long time to pick it up. "Hello." A cold sneer came from across. "I thought you didn't plan to answer my phone just after I received the money." Susu didn't understand the other person's eerie voice and said, "What can I do for you?" "Mrs. Hua, since we are already married, should I go to the hospital to see my father?" Law. Susu's face changed instantly. "The surgery hasn't been performed yet. If my dad finds out that she married Hosson, with his bad temper, how could he be willing to go to the operating table? Hoschen, can we not come? Are you begging me?" Knowing what the other person wanted and not daring to let him provoke her father, Susu gritted her lips and said, "Please." After a moment of silence, the other end suddenly said, "But what should I do? I have already arrived." Susu looked up incredulously and saw the figure slowly approaching her at the end of the corridor. Her brain crashed and she had no response for a moment. Hoschen actually came. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Our Wedding Night. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Our Wedding Night. But can he kindly come to see his father? Susu doesn't believe it. As the other person approached the door of the ward, she quickly stepped forward, grabbed his hand, and walked towards the safe passage. Hosson did not shake off her. "Why did you come to the hospital?" Susu nervously asked, making sure that her parents wouldn't see her here. "Oh, my father-in-law is hospitalized and needs surgery, shouldn't I come? Normally, my son-in-law would come, but she didn't believe Hosson was so kind." Susu politely said, "My dad is currently in poor health and needs to rest. Can we wait until his surgery is over before telling him about our marriage?" The man standing in front of her, with clear eyebrows and straight features, was the kind of appearance that was easily remembered at a glance. But this person's gaze was too cold, and the overall temperament also changed. "Susu, what qualifications do you have now to negotiate terms with me? Please." Hoschen pursed his thin lips coldly. He suddenly made a move and grabbed Susu's chin, looking at her pitiful appearance. It's hard to imagine how cruelly he abandoned him with such a delicate and weak face back then. "Do you think this move will still work for me?" As he finished speaking, he turned around. Susu knew he was going to the hospital room and quickly hugged him from behind. "My dad can't be stimulated now. If his health goes wrong, I won't forgive you." The temperature behind him made Hoschen stiff all over. Although her body temperature was so warm, her words were even colder than cold arrows. "Mrs. Hua is really a filial daughter." Feeling like he was making a pun and mocking her, Susu bit her lip and let go of her hand, saying, "I just want to protect my family. Now, I only have them left. Only they are left." "Ha." Hoschen sneered, "That's right. I angered my father-in-law too early, and my son-in-law is also too unfilial. Susumo." The other person turned around and pinched her chin, saying, "It's our wedding night tonight. I'm waiting for Mrs. Hua. Remember to go home early." Susu's face suddenly turned red and white. Taking care of Li's father in the hospital until midnight, Susu slowly arrived at the new villa that Hosson had just bought. Every inch of land and every inch of gold in this area, Hoschen now is really different from him back then. She stood at the door, ringing the bell, thinking that Hosson would be the one opening the door, but to her surprise, she was a middle-aged woman. The other party saw her and smiled, "Madam, come in quickly, it's so late, it's cold outside." The sound of "madam" made Susu a bit uncomfortable. She entered the room, changed into the slippers that the other person had given her, looked around, and asked, "He Can you ask the young master? He's already asleep. I'm Sister Moo, is Madam hungry? Do you want to cook some late-night snacks for you? Susu shook her head and her gaze drifted slightly. Where do I sleep at night? Mrs. Hua's question, is it too funny? A figure slowly descended from the rotating marble ladder. He has a slender figure, facial features like ink, and a noble demeanor with a cold aura. Susu looked up at him foolishly for a long time, then nervously pursed her lips. Hoschen had already approached her with an indifferent gaze and said, Why, I'm afraid I'll eat you. Susu's hand involuntarily twisted the corner of her clothes and said, My dad's emotions just stabilized, that's why he came back so late. She tried to change the atmosphere and forced a smile, Are you hungry? I'll cook noodles for you to eat. Since she is married, for any reason, she has become Mrs. Hua. Susu wanted to try to resolve Hoshen's hatred towards her and the Li family. Unexpectedly, Hoschen suddenly leaned over and whispered in her ear, I have a different kind of hunger now. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. She has the illusion that she is about to fall into the mouth of a big bad wolf. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. She has the illusion that she is about to fall into the mouth of a big bad wolf. The woman's face turned red. Sister Moo is still here, what did he say? She tried to push Hoschen away, but the man grabbed his wrist. The next second, Susu was picked up by the waist. She instinctively looked at Sister Moo, who silently went back to her room to sleep. Susu. She has an illusion that she is about to fall into the mouth of a big bad wolf. Up the stairs, Hoschen threw her onto the bed, and Susu groaned, not knowing why he suddenly became angry. She got up from bed and was suppressed by a tall figure before having a chance to admire the wedding room. The other person pinched her neck and said, Susu, should I ask you to come back earlier? Looking at the man's cold eyes, her shoulders trembled slightly and she said, I explained, my dad's situation has just stabilized. Hoschen stared at her delicate face, feeling even more suffocating. He finished work at 7 o'clock and went home, but she didn't come back until after midnight. Susu dared not be alone with him, especially the angry Hoschen. She stuttered and said, I came back from the hospital with a lot of fine bacteria on my body. Can I take a shower first? She remembered that Hoschen had a cleanliness fetish. But he may have forgotten in anger. Sure enough, Hoshen's face began to turn sour, as if he was looking at the virus in his eyes. He let go and Susu quickly stood up. Then she thought of another question. I don't have my clothes here, otherwise I'll be back tonight. Hosson stood aside and sneered, it used to be something that didn't pass through me before. What's the affectation now? Mrs. Hua. The last 3 words seemed to emphasize her current identity. Then, he walked towards a nearby wall and gently pushed it away. Susu looked in surprise and saw that it was actually an invisible cloakroom. She was planning to pick out a set of pajamas to fit in, but unexpectedly, a white object flew over her head. Susu grabbed it with all her hands and feet, her face turning red. Is he intentional? The shirt is made of real silk and is thin. More importantly, the slim fit design. Seeing through her hesitation, Hosson said expressionlessly, you can choose not to wear anything. Sooner or later, you need to be honest with each other. Finally, add. I have seen all the more restricted levels before. Susu. Her face is no longer available. She closed her eyes, adjusted her breathing, and silently entered the bathroom. She tried her best to convince herself that she was now Hosson's wife and not to make him angry. But after taking a shower, she looked at the clothes in her hand and still couldn't get started. Because Hoschen was humiliating her. After hesitating for a while, Susu endured the discomfort and put on her underwear, then put on a white shirt. The clothes are just up to the base of the thighs, covering the buttocks. Just shake it and it will be exposed. She has no eyes. Hosson waited until he was almost asleep before hearing the sound of the bathroom door opening. His straight and fair legs caught his attention first, even his toes were round and beautiful. Thinking that it had once tightly wrapped around his waist, Hossen's gaze darkened and he said, "Come here." Susu pursed her lips. "Why didn't you keep him asleep?" As soon as she approached, Hoschen pulled her over, and her shirt fluttered as she lifted a corner. Hoschen lowered his face coldly and said, "You're really successful." Knowing what he was saying, Susu quickly pulled down her hem and covered her legs. A pretty face, red as blood. Hosson suddenly pushed her away and said, "It's a disappointment." Then he got up and walked to the door, suddenly stopping again. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Bring your things over today. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Bring your things over today. Susu's heart lifted. I heard him say, "Isn't it about cooking noodles? I always have to satisfy my appetite, otherwise why would I marry you back?" She said, "But I'm dressed like this. Sister Mu won't come out." Finally, Susu cooked the noodles she was best at with her big red face. During the process, she kept worrying about Sister Mu coming out, so she decided not to. Hosson finished eating and, as she wished, kicked her out of the bedroom. Because of his cleanliness obsession, he couldn't accept her putting on the underwear she had been wearing all day and putting it back on. Before going to bed, Susu washed her clothes. Then in the guest room, sleep peacefully. The next day, Susu was awakened by an alarm clock set in advance. Remembering her father at the hospital, she quickly woke up. The clothes were already dry, she put them on and went into the bathroom. On the shelf, there are new toiletries. When Susu went downstairs, Hoschen was having breakfast. The man glanced at her clothes and frowned slightly. "Bring all your things over today." "Okay." She sat in front of him in a proper way, and Sister Mu brought a bowl of congee. Seeing her motionless for a long time, Hosson sneered, "Why, it doesn't suit Mrs. Hua's taste." Before the bankruptcy of Shi Group, Susu was a wealthy young lady who grew up with a golden spoon in her mouth. She knew he was mocking her. "No, I'm not picky about food." Hossen's gaze was eerie. Growing up with a golden spoon in his mouth, Susu does not have many of the bad habits of wealthy ladies. But it doesn't stop her from being ruthless. How heartless she is. Susu. "After dinner, I have to go to the hospital to take care of my father." Hoschen took a mouthful of congee and sneered. He really has a good filial daughter. This person speaks with a spear in her mouth, and she purses her lips without saying a word. Sister Mu smiled and said, "Madam, I don't know what you like to eat, so I'll arrange it for you according to the young master's taste." Susu. "It's okay, I'm free." After breakfast, she took her bag and prepared to go to the hospital, and Hosson happened to be at work as well. But he had no intention of giving her a ride. Looking at the black Maybach passing by, Susu patted his cheek without caring. Hoschen now hates her, and marrying her back is just a revenge for her betrayal. She's not good, that's why he's happy. Arriving at the hospital, Susu suddenly saw a group of doctors rushing into her father's ward. Her face changed instantly and she ran over in a hurry. Lee's mother kept crying and was persuaded by the nurse to come out. Seeing her daughter, she cried even more sadly. What should Susu do? Your father's situation suddenly worsened. He. How could it be? Didn't it be okay yesterday? Your father has been keeping it from you, but in fact, he has vomited blood several times. Susu's face turned pale. She supported Lee's mother, feeling cold all over. I don't know how long I waited, but Lee's attending physician came out of the single patient room. Susu immediately welcomed him and said, "Dean Liu, my dad." The middle-aged man glanced at Lee's mother, who was experiencing emotional breakdown, and said to her, "Come with me to the office." Knowing that he had something to talk to himself alone, Susu asked his mother to stay and take care of her father. 10 minutes later, her whole body seemed to be drained of blood and her body was on the verge of collapse. You said. Cancer cells have spread. Yes, based on your father's current situation, to be honest, I am not confident that the surgery will be successful. Susu's eyes were extremely red. She blinked her sour eyes and asked, what is the chance of success? Dean Lu compared a number and said, less than 20%. Is there no other way? Dean Lu used to know fatherly, and seeing her like this made her feel a bit unbearable. It's not entirely impossible, but it's a bit difficult. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. I don't know why I suddenly gave up medicine and started doing business. It's a pity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. I don't know why I suddenly gave up medicine and started doing business. It's a pity as long as there is hope, Susu cannot give up. She excitedly grabbed Dean Lu's arm and said, what's the solution? Money's not a problem, I've already. Her voice choked up and she said, we've already raised the money. It's not a matter of money. There used to be a very outstanding chief surgeon at the Digestive Disease Center at the first hospital, but he has already resigned. Which hospital did he go to? I'll go find him, and I'll definitely invite him over to perform surgery on my father. Dean Lu shook his head and said, he has left the medical field and is now an outstanding businessman. Susu's heart trembled suddenly. She thought of something, but still waited for the landing dean to say the person's name in person. His name is Hoschen. That young man's achievements in the medical field are even higher than many senior colleagues. But I don't know why he suddenly gave up medicine and started business. It's a pity. Susu went home to take a shower and changed into clothes. She remembers Hoschen used to like to eat sweet and sour meat from a restaurant. That store doesn't open until after 5 p.m., and there is always a long queue. She bought sweet and sour pork before taking a car back to Xingsher Longtang. Sister Mu was surprised to see that she was much earlier than yesterday. She took the packaging box from Susu's hand and heard her ask, has Hosson come back? Not yet. The young master said he won't go home for dinner tonight. Should I call him and tell him you're back early? Susu quickly stopped him and said, no need, he's busy with work. Don't disturb him. Wait for him to come back. As a result, several hours have passed. After dinner, Susu was too tired and accidentally leaned against the sofa in the bedroom to fall asleep. When Hoschen returned, she didn't even know. Sister Mu saw the familiar car stalling, and as the man entered the room, she said, young master, Madam bought a box of sweet and sour pork today and brought it specifically for you. Perhaps after drinking, Hosson's eyes were a bit hazy. Upon hearing her words, the man's eyes turned cold and he said, I don't like to eat, I'll throw it away. Sister Mu. Ah. That's so wasteful. I've been to that store before and I have to queue up for a long time. Hoschen naturally understood. He bought it for Susu to eat. He said, throw it away. Susu slept in a daze, she was awakened by pain. She dreamed that she had been bitten by a dog, and then opened her eyes to see Hosson gnawing at her. It's really a gnawing, a kiss without any technical skills. Hoschen, I want to discuss something with you, he said as he couldn't help but push him away. Her refusal was undoubtedly pouring a basin of water onto the blazing firewood. Hosson completely cooled down. He stood back with a calm face and looked at her expressionlessly. Is there no response at all because I no longer love? What are you discussing? If you don't want to fulfill your wife's obligations, I advise you to give up. Otherwise, will I marry you and come back to confess? This is really unpleasant to hear. Susu bit her lip, tidied up her messy clothes, and stood up, saying, you misunderstood. I would like you to perform surgery on my father. The atmosphere suddenly solidified. Hoschen squinted at her for a long time and suddenly sneered, "Surgery on your father. No wonder he bought his favorite food specifically." She lowered her eyes and said, "Yes." Dean Liu said, "Your main sword has a success rate of 70.8%. The others? None of them can do it." Hee hee. "It sounds really nice, not even me can do it. 5 years ago, why didn't you expect today?" Perhaps after drinking, Hoshen's tone and attitude were full of aggression. Susu felt stabbed in the heart. Yes, she really couldn't imagine that they would have such a relationship in 5 years. I'm married to you now. My dad is your father. In law, he. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. No Awakening of Mrs. Ho. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. No Awakening of Mrs. Ho, want to engage in moral kidnapping. Upon hearing the man's tone of indifference, Susu's eyes turned red, but she didn't cry. "It's just a surgery, aren't you a doctor?" Hosson repeated her words, "Just." "Huh, Mrs. Ho doesn't know. I haven't had a surgical knife in 5 years." He continued to curse at each other. "I can't guarantee that I won't shake my hands after such a long absence. It wouldn't be good if I accidentally cut off the other organs of my father. In law." Susu's face turned pale. 5 years did you not bring the surgical knife?" Her eyes turned red, as if she was about to cry at any moment, and Hosson's mood suddenly became depressed. Suddenly pushing her away, pulling open the button on the collar, as if it could be more comfortable. "I don't want to fulfill my wife's responsibilities, get out." Hoschen. The man continued to do what he had just done, but Susu's face was full of panic and she turned her head and ran away. Watching her reaction, Hosson remained silent for a long time before entering the bathroom. The next day, Susu went to the hospital again. She told Dean Liu about Hoshen's failure to use a surgical knife in 5 years. The other party was very surprised and said, "Have you contacted Mr. Hua?" "Yes." Dean Liu seemed to sigh. Xiao Hua used to be very persistent in medicine. His achievements can be said to mostly come from his persistence and hard work. Of course, he also has indispensable talent. Susu tugged at her heart. She only then realized that Hosson enjoyed being a doctor so much. But did he decide to abandon medicine and enter business because of his father's humiliation? Dean Liu, is there any other way to go? He can't complete the surgery smoothly anymore. Dean Liu sighed and shook his head. The light in her eyes instantly extinguished. Unable to let her parents know that surgery might not be possible, Susu forced a smile in the hospital. "I got home in the evening, but Hoschen hasn't come back yet." Susu dragged her tired body and prepared to take a shower in the guest room. Suddenly, she remembered that she had forgotten to bring her luggage over again. Recently, due to her father's illness, she has been feeling restless, tired every day. Why bother with her luggage? Without any clothes to change, and she didn't want to wear Hoshen's anymore, Susu turned around and went downstairs. Unexpectedly, the man happened to come back from outside, with a solemn expression and a serious smile. Seeing Susu holding his bag, Hoschen asked in a deep voice, "It's so late, still going out?" I forgot to bring my luggage over." Knowing that she was not attentive and lacked the consciousness to be Mrs. Hua, I didn't trust his words. Hoschen, with a cold face, handed the pastry in his hand to Sister Mu and said, "Here it is for you." Sister Mu took it in confusion and said, "What?" She has been taking care of the young master for over a decade, and this is the first time she has received a gift. She is really flattered. The man walked upstairs with a calm face and had no intention of taking Susu to pick up his luggage. She looked enviously at the pastry logo in Sister Mu's hand. That was her favorite restaurant before. Hoschen was intentional, right, knowing that she loves to eat. "I bought it as a gift for Sister Mu." Madam, would you like some food? There's quite a lot. How dare she? Susu shook her head and said, I don't like to eat. When Hosson went downstairs again, she had already gone out. Seeing the intact and unopened box on the table, he coldly asked, Where is she? Sister Mu was serving dinner and said, Oh, Madam has gone home to pick up her luggage. Young master, Madam is quite thin and weak, and I don't know if she can handle it. Hosson said, What does it have to do with me? She's not stupid, she can't even ask for help. Oh. Young master, dinner is ready. Would you like to have it first? Hosson glanced at the pastry box again and turned around coldly, I'm not hungry, I'll eat later. End of this chapter. Do you believe everything I say in chapter 7? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Do you believe everything I say in chapter 7? As he walked towards the third floor, Sister Mu knew he was busy and didn't dare to disturb him. Unexpectedly, Hoschen turned back and said, She didn't say she wanted to eat. Sister Mu. Madam said to come back for dinner after taking things. I didn't mean dinner. Following the man's gaze and looking at the pastry box on the table, Sister Mu suddenly said, Oh, I asked, and my wife said she doesn't like it. She felt as if the young master's face had become even more gloomy after she finished speaking. He remained silent and turned upstairs, never coming down again. It's so late, Susu didn't want to trouble anyone, so she simply tidied up her clothes. Other things will be moved later. Otherwise, one day when my mother comes back, she will find that her things are missing and she won't be able to explain clearly. Dragging a suitcase, Su's soda truck returned to Xingshi. Sister Mu helped her pick up the suitcase and said, The food is all hot. Does Madam eat it now? Well, eat now, it's troublesome. Sister Mu glanced upstairs and said, It's okay. By the way, the young master hasn't eaten yet. Susu was stunned as she looked at the time, it was almost 9 o'clock. He often does this and doesn't eat on time. I'm not quite sure, young master used to rarely go home for dinner. Otherwise, would Madam go upstairs and call him? Susu. She is Hosson's wife, and there seems to be no reason to refuse. Susu walked up the third floor, counted the rooms, and arrived at the room that Sister Mu had mentioned. She tried knocking on the door, but no one answered. Susu couldn't help but think of Hoschen, who used to dislike eating on time. Worried that he might have a recurrence of stomach problems like 5 years ago, she opened the door and entered directly. But the study room was empty, with no one around. What about people? Susu stepped out and looked at the other room. Hearing something moving inside, she knocked again, but no one paid attention. She opened the door again and was taken aback. This room is full of bottles and jars, filled with various human organs. Her pretty face turned pale and she froze in fear. Immediately after, Hoschen came out from a small door next to him, wearing gloves and his hands covered in blood. Susu screamed and turned to run. The man took off his gloves and quickly pulled him back, pressing against the door. What are you shouting about? You. What are you doing? How terrifying. Susu's mind had already fantasized about a bloody horror film. Hoshen's face grew darker and darker. What do you think of me as? That's not human blood. Do you abuse small animals? He laughed angrily. Just now he only had time to take off one glove, his left hand was still stained with blood. Hoschen deliberately lifted it up and approached her, looking at Susu's pale face, suddenly feeling bored again. He released her and stepped back. That rabbit is sick, just help it remove the lesion. Susu was almost scared and crying. What she used to fear the most was horror movies. This man knows and deliberately scares her. Wait a minute, she suddenly got excited and grabbed Hosson's hem, saying, You haven't had a surgical knife in 5 years, haven't you? Hosson. Believe everything I say. Lee Susu's face turned white again. So, was he deliberately deceiving her so as not to help her with the surgery? She bit her lips, trembling slightly at the corners of her eyes, tears streaming down her spine and said, "Why?" Hoschen remained expressionless and said, "Isn't it very simple? Why did I save him? Bring him back to life and then instigate you to leave me again." End of this chapter. In chapter 8, I calculated that your peach blossoms have been thriving lately. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In chapter 8, I calculated that your peach blossoms have been thriving lately. I won't leave, we're already married. Hosson, I swear, as long as you cure my father, I won't leave you. The man sneered, 5 years ago, you said the same thing. But your speed of studying abroad is faster than forgetting your promise. Lee Susu remained silent. She lowered her head and looked at her hand, pulling at his hem. Tears fell like this, hitting the back of her hand. Hoschen brushed away her hand and turned around with a cold face. The bitter meat trick is no longer effective for me. Get out. Lee Susu went downstairs in a daze. Sister Mu saw her coming down alone and asked with confusion, "Is the young master still busy with work in the study?" "He's not in the study." "Sister Mu. Can I ask you something?" Don't be polite, madam. You can ask casually." Lee Susu really wants to know if Hoshen's medical skills have been neglected. Upon hearing her question, Sister Mu was surprised and said, "Is there an operating room at home?" "You don't know?" I don't know at all. There's a room on the 3rd floor, and the young master doesn't let me get close. I've never been inside to clean it. So, it is possible that Hoschen did not really neglect his medical skills. Thinking that her father was saved, Lee Susu's eyes were filled with tears. When Hosson came down, he noticed her eyes shining brightly at him. He paused for 2 seconds as if he hadn't seen it. Sister Mu noticed that the atmosphere between the two was not right and smiled, saying, "Young master and madam, we haven't sat down together for dinner yet. I've been making what young master likes to eat today, so let me know what madam likes to eat. I'll make it tomorrow." Lee Susu glanced at Hoschen and said, "Except for shellfish, everything is fine." Hoschen frowned and gave her a meaningful look. He remembers that 5 years ago she was quite fond of eating shellfish. But after finishing the shellfish sushi, she seemed to have been missing for a few days, only willing to contact him on her phone. Hoschen was once a doctor, and immediately remembered something. He grabbed Lee Susu's hand, pulled up his sleeve, and indeed saw some red dots on it that had not yet faded. But because there was no doubt on his face. "Are you allergic to shellfish?" There were shellfish in the breakfast congee the day before yesterday. Even though she knew she was allergic, she still took it. To make him feel guilty. How about performing surgery for her father? Lee Susu withdrew her hand and didn't really care, saying, "I took anti-allergic medication." Lee Susu. I don't understand why he was angry, but suddenly Lu Susu, who was yelled at, had a blank expression. Realizing that his emotions were too excited, Hosson closed his eyes and controlled himself before standing up and saying, "I won't eat anymore." He walked outside and soon heard the sound of the car starting. Hoschen became increasingly angry as he thought about it. I don't know why, but he would be so angry when he saw that Lee Susu disregarded his own health for the sake of Lee He. He went to the bar to find his brother. Su-dae is a truly wealthy second generation, the kind with power and influence. Usually, his eyes are above his head, and there are not many people he can appreciate. Hoschen is one of them. This person is usually too calm and self-control, making him drink is like taking his life. 9 out of 10 times he didn't accept his invitation, but today he took the initiative to come knocking on his door. Su-dae personally mixed a glass of wine, handed it to him, and scolded, finally remembered, "You still have a good brother." Hoschen drank and ignored him. Su-tian felt fresh and said, "Brother, I'll do a divination for you." He didn't know where to find a compass and pretended to play with it. Then his eyes lit up and he said, "Hoschen, I've calculated that you've been having a lot of peach blossoms lately. Are there too many women and I don't know how to choose, so you came to me to drink and relieve your worries? It's okay, I have a brilliant solution. You can tell me their contact information, and my brothers will handle everything for you tomorrow." End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Even if I have a kidney leak, I am not afraid. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Even if I have a kidney leak, I am not afraid. Hoschen finally looked at him and said, "Are you not afraid of kidney deficiency?" Su-dae playfully hooked his neck and said, "Isn't it you? Dr. Hua is here, and even if I have a kidney leak, I'm not afraid." Hosson handed him the empty cup and said, "Keep going. Okay, are you treating me like a little brother?" Although he said that, he still mixed a new glass of wine and said, "Drinking too much is boring. I'll find you a pretty girl." The bar of the second generation of wealthy people is not lacking in beautiful women. Hosson looked at the swaying women under the bar, showing no interest at all. "Do you have someone surnamed Lee? Please come and drink with me." Su Tian was very surprised. He has seen people who want breasts, legs, and buttocks, but he has never seen anyone who wants a surname. Just as he was about to answer, he suddenly heard again, "Forget it, even those surnamed Lee have a hard heart." Su-dae. It's past midnight, and Lee Susu is dozing off on the sofa in the living room. She is too tired. But Hoschen left angrily, and she didn't dare to go up and sleep on her own. If he hasn't calmed down, he's even less willing to undergo surgery for his father. Sister Mu knew that she was taking care of her father in the hospital during the day and felt sorry for her. She said, "Madam, can you go back to your room and sleep? When the young master comes back, I will tell you." Lee Susu shook his head and said, "I have something to ask him for. I have to wait until he comes back." Sister Mu is not sure what happened between them, she just doesn't feel like an ordinary couple. After all, the young master has not disclosed any news of his marriage to his family. Lee Susu. "Sister Mu, you go to sleep, don't have to accompany me. Then I'll go to bed first." Not long after Sister Mu returned to her room, the sound of an engine came from outside. Lee Susu was awakened and completely awakened. She immediately got up and walked towards the door. Just as I opened the door, I met a clean and tidy handsome face. The other person seemed surprised and took a step back to make sure they didn't walk into the wrong house. "You." Lee Susu didn't know if Hoschen had told his friend that he was married. For a moment, I dare not reveal my identity. She looked at the man supported by Su-dae and smelled a strong smell of alcohol, not knowing how much he had drunk. You. Lee Susu and Su-dae spoke out at the same time, and the other person looked at her delicate face, their eyes lit up and said, "How could Hoschen hide a delicate woman in a golden house?" She pursed her lips and said, "He seems to be feeling quite uncomfortable. Can we come in first?" Although Su-dae gossiped about her relationship with Hoschen, he also drank in the middle of the night, so he didn't stay much. Before leaving, he told Lee Susu, "This guy drank a lot of alcohol at night, so I'll leave it to you to take care of. It's probably going to be uncomfortable in the middle of the night." Upon realizing the implied meaning, Lee Susu replied, "Don't worry. Su Tian is indeed at ease. This woman must have had an affair with Hoschen." Lee Susu looked at the man sleeping on the sofa and felt a bit puzzled. She couldn't hold him to the room alone, it seemed like she could only spend the night with him in the living room. Hosson woke up in the middle of the night, feeling that the texture beneath him was not right, and his black eyes brushed open. He gradually took off his guard only after confirming that the environment in front of him was familiar. Su Tian is someone who can do anything. At that moment, he was really worried about a strange woman lying next to him. He had an affair right after getting married, and his upbringing did not allow it. Thirsty, he covered his dull and painful head and sat up, only to find a petite figure leaning against a single sofa next to him. Susu is actually not short. Her height is considered tall in the girls' circle. Nearly 1.7 meters. But she's too thin, curled up there, she looks thin and small. Hoschen leaned back, with a lazy demeanor, leaning against Susu in an indifferent manner. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Wanting to poison him and become a widow. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Wanting to poison him and become a widow. In 5 years, she hasn't changed much, except for her originally beautiful short hair that has grown long and curled up to her ear, making her more mature and graceful. He sneered at what came to his mind. Susu became more adept at deceiving people like this. Because she looks too weak and innocent. Suddenly, the person with tightly closed eyes whimpered and there were signs of waking up. She opened her eyes and let her head go for a few seconds before looking at the man who was still sleeping. Upon discovering that most of his blanket had fallen to the ground, Susu stood up and picked it up, tightly covering the man. As he was preparing to retreat, his wrist suddenly caught and Susu was stunned. She looked up and her gaze unexpectedly collided with the man's black eyes. Are you awake? Are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere? Do you want to drink water? The soft light hit her face, and the woman's tone was gentle, like a considerate and good wife. Hosson pushed her away expressionlessly and said, "Don't touch me casually. That tone should be more disrespectful, more disrespectful." Susu lowered her eyes and said, "I'm sorry, your blanket just fell off." Feeling that there was no need to explain so much, she perked up and said, "Are you thirsty?" He was awakened from thirst, but Hoschen didn't want her to serve him. He lifted the blanket and suddenly felt a dull pain in his head. He propped his forehead and closed his eyes, adjusting his state. Damn it, did Sude intentionally do it? Give him such a strong drink. A warm cup of water appeared in front of him, and Susu thought for a moment and placed the cup on the table. "I won't touch you, you can drink it yourself." Hoschen suddenly said expressionlessly, "I won't perform surgery on your father, there's no need to deliberately please me." Susu pursed her lips and said, "I will try my best to make you change your mind." Haha. Mrs. Hu thinks her charm is so great that she can make me fall twice on the same person. I didn't mean that. He didn't want to listen anymore and didn't touch the water she brought. Instead, he woke up Sister Mu and asked her to pour water upstairs. Looking at the man's unsteady back, Susu told herself that this was what she owed him back then, so don't get angry but you're so angry. Although Susu doesn't have the stinky habit of being pampered by many wealthy heirs, he does have a small temper. But thinking of her father who was still waiting for Hosson's surgery in the hospital, her shoulders collapsed again. The next day, Hosson woke up and smelled a fragrance at the tip of his nose. He went upstairs last night and took sobering pills, and his condition is much better today. Appetite follows. I thought it was congee prepared by Sister Mu, but when I opened my eyes, I saw Susu's charming and smiling face. Hosson. She said kindly, "Are you awake? I cooked your favorite century egg lean meat congee." He remembered the noodles from that night and could only barely say he could eat them. "And she cooked congee in the morning, just learned from Sister Mu, why don't you try it?" Heard that he had just learned something, Hoschen glanced at congee that night, with a strange expression. Why is it so black? Wanted to poison him and become a widow. Susu reasonably explained. Because there are century egg. The skin of century egg is black. Hoschen was silent for a few seconds. How many century egg did you put? Sister Mu said you love to eat, so I put in 5. Does she know? Sister Mu said you woke up and must be moved to see this bowl of congee. Hoschen dared not move at all. He rubbed his temples, and she immediately asked, "Does your head hurt? Do you want me to help you massage it?" Quickly put down congee, Susu climbed onto the bed and knelt in front of him. End of this chapter.